We are now officially recording.
We are now officially recording. Okay.
No, this is good. This is good. So, guys, good morning, everyone. Marinelle, for you and I, this is our annual FAFSA update webinar, where basically I take us through the 1920 FAFSA in this case. I always like, I always like to begin here. I feel like we generally begin here at the eligibility screen. You know, before we actually get into talking about the FAFSA, so who actually should be completing the FAFSA? And so what you see here, this is an infographic that we pulled, or specifically that Federal Student Aid created years ago, that we've been using ever since, that outlines the students who should be eligible, should be able to submit a FAFSA because they should possess a valid Social Security number and fall into one of these categories, specifically first a citizen, and then thereafter there's that eligible non-citizen category. And so examples of eligible non-citizenship would be a student who has a green card, which that student would be considered a permanent resident. A student who has an arrival departure record that specifically is designated with one of the statuses that you see there in the infographic, for example, refugee, asylum granted, so forth and so on. The last two statuses, I will be honest, I actually have never worked with a student that has had a battered immigrant status or been on a T visa. That's me. Perhaps some of you have in your work, but just FYI, I technically, or not technically, I have not seen necessarily a student who is here in the United States on a battered immigrant or T visa status. But just FYI, per Federal Student Aid, these students should also have valid Social Security numbers, and if they are on such a status, they would be eligible to submit a FAFSA. And so for the most part, for you and I, we're working with, at least from an eligible perspective, citizens, green card holders, and arrival departure record folks, but specifically that are designated with those statuses that you see on the infographic. So on the flip side, who's ineligible, right? So who should not be submitting FAFSA? And these would be examples of students not submitting a FAFSA. So our students who are DACA, those are our Deferred Action of Childhood Arrival students. DACA students, as many of you know, they do receive a social, but it's for work purposes only. These students will not qualify for federal or state aid, hence they should not submit a FAFSA, at least for federal or state aid purposes. The only caveat there, I have worked with some colleges that have asked such students to submit a paper FAFSA, but not submit it to the federal government, instead just complete like a paper FAFSA and turn back into the college itself for institutional aid purposes. But that's a college-by-college decision, specifically with our private colleges. And then most of your, I use the term alphabet soup of visas. So your F visas, your J visas, your G visas. I know my team, we've been asked recently in the last couple of weeks, I think we're beginning to see some L visas. And there's a whole list, no joke folks, of like every letter in the alphabet, there's a visa for essentially. And again, the majority of those, if not all of them, other than that T visa, which again, I've never actually worked with a student that has a T visa, those students will be ineligible for federal or state aid and should not submit a FAFSA, at least for federal or state aid purposes. So to be clear, a DACA student and an undocumented student, which we don't have listed, but let me say that, an undocumented student, you know, an FJ visa student, these students would not qualify for Pell Grant. They will not qualify for Tennessee Promise. They will not qualify for the Hope Scholarship. Yesterday, I was at Lead Academy doing a FAFSA workshop, and just here's an example of a social that I actually encountered several times yesterday. And anytime I see a social like this, and it looks a lot like mine and yours with the one exception, it says specifically valid for work only, in this case with INS authorization, but there's other words you might see printed on such socials. Guys, when I typically see a student with such social, that's when I follow with the next question, hey, what's your status? Talk to me a little bit. So, typically speaking, this is an example of what a DACA social looks like, but then yesterday I had several students who were on a work visa. Forgive me, I don't know what alphabet that was or alphabet visa that was, honestly, but students that are here on work visas, again, until they either become a permanent resident or if there is a citizenship process for such student, someone on work visa, specifically a student, would also not qualify for FAFSA in terms of they should not be applying for FAFSA. So just an FYI in terms of socials, that if you ever see a student with a social like this, that's when there should be some questions that you want to ask. And as always, folks, you can always follow back up with myself or someone from our team. So now that we've explained eligibility, basically who can, in terms of student, that can submit a FAFSA versus who cannot, now let's jump into the 1920 FAFSA that actually opened up on Monday. You know what, this year's FAFSA, just as a reminder, we're still, it's still using prior tax year information, so that means our parents, our students should be or will be asked about their 2017 tax/income information. Those of you on the call that are or will have workshops coming up, FAFSA workshops, whether someone from the TSAC team will be there or whether you have someone from the nonprofit College Access World there or college there helping out, one thing to assist us, all of us, please encourage your parents and students to not only bring their 2017 tax information if they actually filed 2017 taxes, but also please encourage them to bring their 2017 W-2s. We'll get to this more in a bit, but that's two pieces of information that parents and students should have just in case, because it's going to make that FAFSA filing experience, at least professionally, a cleaner process. I'm going to say it like that. All right. A couple of things about the 1920 FAFSA that you may be aware of, but just FYI, and this also impacts the 1819 FAFSA because about into mid-August, FAFSA let us all know that they had completely redesigned the website. And in this case, new colors, new fonts, so in other words, the layout, the feel of it looks a little bit different for you and I. It will look a little bit different for parents that have done this, in the last, say, decade, because basically the FAFSAs had the same colors and fonts for the last decade. So just FYI, here is a picture or screenshots of when you go to FAFSA.gov, you now arrive at this page that's navy as opposed to being white and have a picture of a bunch of students. Now it's navy. And I'll say this, what was funny is on Monday, you probably got this as well. A lot of texts, a lot of emails from parents and counselors saying, whoa, Jason, is this the right site? Again, yeah, FAFSA.gov, this FY, this is what the new site looks like in terms of new colors, new fonts. So what was the reason for the new site? Well, it's because FAFSA has optimized it so that students can submit the FAFSA through mobile devices, tablets, and they've also created for the first time an app. This app is available now by going to the Apple Store or Google Play and searching for My Student Aid. And once you search My Student Aid, the My Student Aid app will come up that the student or parent may download if they so choose to submit the FAFSA via app. This is what day 5, FAFSA report from the field. In some instances, some of my folks have really enjoyed helping students and parents with the app this far. But I think the biggest issue, Marinelle and I were talking about this right before we began. I think because so many users are on the system, whether it's online at FAFSA.gov or even on the app, the system's being bogged down. We are encountering error messages where FAFSA's kicking out parents and students. And guys, that's unfortunate, but folks, understand, I mean, you know, like any, I guess any online system, you know, it's probably only, you know, whether it's right or wrong, it's probably only set up for so many users to be using it at one time. And unfortunately, there's been some hiccups. But again, word from the street, back to the app for a second, is the app has actually been good to use so far. And so, again, that might be something that some of your parents and students will choose to use. So, again, the app is out there.
And Jason will join us again next Friday to do a webinar specific to the app. So if you haven't already registered for that, you can also sign up.
Yeah. And a lot of people that you've heard, for those of you on the call that perhaps I presented at your school, one thing you probably remember me saying about the app is that second bullet point, joking about it was supposed to be fully functional on October 1. I will say early in the day on Monday, it was not fully functional. The issue was early on Monday, just by the way, that the app was, students and parents were unable to use data retrieval for the 1920 FAFSA via the app. That has been corrected. So now the IRS data retrieval tool is back being able to be used for the app. So that was my biggest concern with the app before its launch on Monday, because at that point in time, the IRS data retrieval tool had not been even available for the 1819 FAFSA via the app. So at least early on, my concern was if the IRS data retrieval tool is not even an option on the app, to me the app is worthless, because we want our parents and students who are able to use the app, who are able to use the data retrieval tool, I should say, we want them to use it from a verification perspective. All right, now that's the introduction to 1920 FAFSA. I think before we get into the 1920 FAFSA, we do need to talk about the FSA ID, the username and password. And folks, counselors, you know, I think you guys know, many of you on this call that I see, you guys know me. We've talked about this. You probably have this. But, guys, that FSA ID, what that is that username password that student and parent create. It's not some number they're going to get after the fact. You know, don't confuse it with the verifying the mobile number where the student does get a secure code, or verifying the email address via the FSA ID process where there's a secure code. Again, that FSA ID, that is that username password that the student creates and then that the parent creates. And obviously my biggest thing with FSA ID creation is students and parents need to write down their information. There's the username that they create, the password that they create, the mobile number that they use for, say, the student account, the email that they use for the student account, and then also those challenge question answers. They've got to see those and write them down and keep this information just in case there are issues that occur and the student needs to reset their password or learn their username. And again, the same goes for the parent as well, because again, a parent will also need to create a username password for FAFSA, as you guys know. Marianelle.
So I just want to throw in here, one thing I saw that was great at Polk County High School a couple of weeks ago was they had printed cards that were the size of a credit card that you could put in your wallet, where students could list their passwords. And I just thought this was so great, because I know that I would lose a sheet of paper. So having those little cards that they could just put directly into their wallet, I thought was such a great idea for helping students keep track of all these passwords.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That is a wonderful, wonderful idea. So thank you for sharing that with everyone, Marianelle. So just a quick couple of slides about FSA ID and reminders, especially if you're helping a student, just to maybe refresh your memory about FSA ID. First and foremost, the site specifically is fsaid.ed.gov. No www dot is needed before that. You should simply, if you go to Google Chrome or Safari or Edge, you should just type in the URL fsaid.ed.gov. Boom, it'll take you to the FSA ID site, where, again, this is the page as you scroll down once you arrive, where the student or parent, whoever's creating the username password, this is where they begin. again, as a reminder, there's a lot of reminders, right, that you're going to hear me say that phrase a lot during this. But as a reminder, the only thing that's required on that initial screen is for the student or parent to create a username and password. Having an email is actually optional. There are some folks that think it's mandatory. It's not. The email is optional. Now, do I encourage an email? Absolutely, right? But it is an optional field. I know I was at one school, Marynell, that I can't think of the school name, but the school that Marynell, we work with all schools, right? But it might have been one of our advise or gear up schools. And this was a great idea. They were creating a lot of free email accounts for parents and students just to do the FAFSA ID. And I was like, hey, I think that's great. Now, I don't mean to say this, but you do know that's optional, and they didn't know that. They thought it was a required field. Here's my take on the email as we go through this. You guys know, if a student uses an email and or parent, or they indicate they have a mobile number, the biggest thing to me is we need that student to have either or, an email or a mobile number, so that they can, quote, verify one of those two, so that if they do run into, I forgot my username or I forgot my password, they can more quickly use their email or mobile number to reset that. Because the problem with the challenge questions and answers is if a student goes to reset their password via the challenge question answer process, they will have to wait 30 minutes before they're able to do anything with the FAFSA. And as you might imagine, when you're at a workshop and you run into this issue right away, that student's going to be frustrated. Unfortunately, that student, that parent should have verified one of the two in the process. So again, a reminder about emails and the mobile number. The other thing, we're going to see this is the second screen of FAFSA ID where the student enters, or parent, first name, last name, date of birth, social, anywhere throughout the FAFSA ID. The biggest thing, guys, these students and parents have got to click that show text box so that they make sure that they're entering their socials correctly. Yesterday, I had a young lady who just flew through the FAFSA ID, and anyways, there was an issue there was an issue that she experienced. We logged back in. We were able to, in her case, see her social, and I clicked show text, and sure enough, she goes, she gasped. That was me gasping. She gasped, and she said, oh, I transposed numbers. And she transposed numbers, and she didn't know it because she hadn't clicked the show text box. These students and parents have got to click show text so that they're seeing what their answer. I get for security purposes why that, but show it and then unshow it, right? But at least look at it. And then this is that mobile recovery option on the third screen where they're asked, would you like to register your mobile number? Yes, they should if they have a mobile number. And again, the emails and mobile numbers are unique per account. So in other words, a student, if they're creating a student username password, their email mobile number must be unique versus a parent who is creating a username password and using a mobile number email for the parent username password. Again, everything's got to be unique. So our parents, our helicopter parents, God bless them, they can't use the same email on the FAFSA ID, right? You cannot use mom@gmail.com for both the student's email and the parent's email as it pertains to the FAFSA ID process. So just a reminder about that. And then there's the challenge question and answers. Again, the reminder about the show text. The other reminder is that questions 3 and 4, students must create on their own. So questions like, what state were you born in? What is your favorite food? These are, to me, easy questions that they can type and then answer. But again, the biggest thing, please, please, please remind them to click show text, because this is where students, again, some students will misspell words. And so they need to see what they are spelling. And even if they don't know better, like if they've left out an E or an S in Tennessee because, bless them, they just don't know any better that that's what Tennessee is supposed to be spelled, at least if they see how they've spelled it and write it down how they spelled it, we're good, right? We're good. All right. Last thing about FAFSA ID, and I thought this slide was appropriate here because we're about ready to go into FAFSA. Saw this a lot yesterday at the school I was at. You're probably experiencing more and more of this. Now we're shifting specifically to the parents. As a reminder, parents without socials, and this would also apply to those parents without socials but do have tax identification numbers. Folks, we do have parents that are without socials that are able, because they're on a work visa, they do have like a tax ID number. But let's be very clear, a tax ID number is not the same as a social, all right? So if you're ever looking at a parent's tax form and you see a social that begins with a 9, that typically is a tax ID number, which should trigger in your head, this parent does not have a social, this is a tax ID number that's been generated. That said, for such parents, as a reminder, if you don't have a social, these parents do not need to create an FSA ID. On the FAFSA, when prompted for the social for parent 1 and or parent 2, right, instead of using that tax ID number if one was given, you have to enter all zeros. So parents without socials on the FAFSA, when they get to the parent section, ask for the social, you enter all zeros as that parent social. At the end of that student's FAFSA, when it asks for the parent signature, that parent's going to have to select the print signature page option. They need to print that page. Once it's printed, the student can submit the FAFSA. Going back to the signature page, the parent will sign that signature page, and then the student parent or school, if you choose to do it for the student, that needs to be mailed. There's a London, Kentucky address that is mailed to on the signature page. So that's how you work with parents without socials. Again, let's be very clear. If their students are citizens or green card holders, they qualify for federal or state aid, regardless of the fact that the parent does not have a social. But parent information is required on that FAFSA. You just use all zeros. Marina, we're good?
I did get a question. If we were able to make the slides available later for people to reference back to. Yes, we can absolutely do that.
So there's my spill on parents without socials and working with those regarding the FAFSA. Quick FAFSA checklist. Hey guys, as a reminder, there's that phrase again, shout out to the TSAC brochure. Hopefully all of you have now received it. If not, let me know. But in the TSAC brochure, we actually do have a 1920 FAFSA panel that actually has this checklist. And again, it is within the TSAC brochure, along with, there's a panel specifically about the FSA ID and some creation tips as well. So shout out to the TSAC brochure and those 2 panels that you will find if you fold out, you know, panel by panel and look at the panels of that TSAC brochure. But, you know, the biggest thing, again, this checklist, this is the second time I'm going to say this. If you are planning a FAFSA workshop, you need to strongly encourage your parents. Please bring 2017 tax information along with the 2017 W-2s. Now, I don't know about you and me. I know at my house, my 2017 W-2s are with my 2017 tax information, but that's not always the case. So, again, and we're going to explain why I need the W-2s in just a second, but there's a second time I'm saying we really need to encourage our parents to bring not only their 2017 tax information, regardless of them using the data retrieval tool, along with their W-2s, and I will explain why in momentarily. Now, once you're in the FAFSA, you know, one thing about the redesign, now at the top of each screen, you're going to see these little navy ribbons. Parents and students need to be cognizant of whose information that particular screen's asked for. So on each screen, you know, it's going to either say student information. So if you see that, that's asking questions about the student. On the other hand, if it says parent information, then this is asking questions about the parent. And parents and students need to make sure that they are, you know, looking at these ribbons and seeing to make sure they're entering the right information. As we get to the common mistakes here in the next probably 6 or 7 slides, you'll see why I reinforce and reiterate whatever word you want to use here in terms of students and parents need to be paying attention of what screen that they are on the FAFSA by always looking at that ribbon on the top of the screen. So The next 6 or 7 slides is actually the entire FAFSA, and I just kind of going to just go through it, not slide by slide or screen by screen per se, but just so that you kind of get a rhythm of what it looks like, because again, what you're going to notice is all the colors and fonts now are uniform, where in previous FAFSA cycles, yeah, Mary Nell, you're right, it's changed colors, right? It used to be a blue screen was student, a purple screen was parent. I'll be honest, guys, I don't know if that really made a difference, because these students and parents were still making the same mistakes and sometimes entering parental information when it was asking for student information and vice versa. But now, potentially, if that did help a little bit, I think now, because of the uniformity, parents and students just got to be that much more cognizant of what the information's asked. So once you go to FAFSA.gov and you click either Start Here or Log In, you get to this login screen, top left-hand corner. Student, if they click I am a student, this is where their username and password will be asked for. Once they click Next, they'll get to the disclaimer page. Once they accept, then they'll be able to choose between the 1920 and the 1819. Those of you who are following along really closely on your screens, that screenshot still reads 1819 and 1718. This was the slide deck that we have available through FSA right now. They have not updated specifically with the 1920 slides. So, guys, again, as a reminder, this looks just like the 1920 FAFSA. Don't get caught up on, oh, well, Jason, the 4th slide on this screen says 1819 again. If they click 1920, then they're going to see 1920 instead. But at any rate, once they click to start a 1920 FAFSA, the 4th screen is where they create a save key. Guys, don't overthink the save key. Ask the student, simply enter a 4-digit number they can remember, write it down. That what the save key allows the student to do, like yesterday when we experienced some, quote, website outages, at least momentarily, what we had to do is once we logged back in, once that student re-entered that save key, that student was then allowed to pick up where he or she last left off at. So again, save key should just be a 4-digit number in my opinion. After that, the student gets on an introduction page. They can click Next. Now they're finally into the FAFSA. The one thing you're going to note as we go through these slides, the questions are in the exact same order, but one thing FAFSA did this year to optimize for that mobile experience is instead of having that initial student demographics page with like 15 questions, that one screen's now going to be broken up into 3 or 4 or 5 screens, right? Kind of like rapid fire questions. So like the first screen will ask the student to review, name, social, date of birth, next. Next screen will ask the student either to review or enter mailing address, zip code, state, email address. Next. Next screen will ask, you know, have you been a resident of your state for 5 years, yes or no? As a reminder here, if the student indicates no, the student, for HOPE purposes and other state aid purposes, as a reminder, they should enter the month and year that they moved to Tennessee. That's an optional question that FAFSA will allow the student to skip. The unfortunate thing is that they skip from entering, if they answer again no, to have you lived here for 5 years, if they answer no. And then they're asked, where's your state of legal residence? The student should select Tennessee. The next question that will be prompted is, what month and year did you become a Tennessee resident? Again, let's be very clear, that question can be skipped. But if it's skipped, it's going to populate for today's date. Today would be 10/2018. That student would not qualify for HOPE eligibility because in our system they would not have satisfied the 1-year residency requirement. Again, they need to make sure they enter the month and year instead of leaving it blank if they answer no to have I lived here 5 years. After clicking next, now it'll ask the student, are you male or female, for the phone number, then for the student's driver's license information. As a reminder, as always, about the driver's license. Here in Tennessee, the state-issued ID, the driver's permit, the driver's license all carries the same number. So in other words, if I was issued a state-issued ID and then got my driver's license permit, I should say my driver's permit, that number from that state-issued ID will continue being my permit number, which will then, when you graduate from your permit to your actual license, that number will carry forward. My point is to say the following. If that student you're working with has a state-issued ID, a permit, or a driver's license, my opinion is he or she should go ahead and enter that number for the driver's license number. Why? Because some of our public colleges now use that number reported on the FAFSA to verify that the student qualifies for in-state tuition, right? So that would save that student an additional requirement that the college might ask them on the back end to verify that they are a Tennessee resident. All right. The next screen, student's marital status. As you might imagine, if I have a mom or dad that's doing that student's FAFSA, this is where moms and dads can get confused, right? But again, if they look at that blue ribbon and they read student information, they should then know, okay, this is asking my son or daughter, is he or she married, right? Hit next. Now the question or FAFSA asks about, are you a citizen? You know, for our citizens, they will select they are. For our green card holders, our I-94 folks, they will select no, comma, but I am an eligible non-citizen. And thereafter, if they select that, they will be asked for their alien registration number, which also is, I believe the term is the USCIS number. It's one and the same on the card that they have been issued by the U.S. government. Selective service. Males. This is a student question that males will see. Are you registered? Many of our high school seniors perhaps have not at this point in time. They will indicate no. The next question that will be asked, would you like FAFSA to register you? I encourage all males to say yes to that question, meaning that do you want FAFSA to register? Yes. That way it can be done because, folks, that is a federal requirement. When you turn 18, you must register selective service. In order to receive financial aid, if you are a male, you've got to satisfy that requirement. The easiest way to do it, whether you're 16, 17, 18, is go ahead and just say yes on the FAFSA to the do you want FAFSA to register you question and let FAFSA do it. I think it's 30 days before the 18th birthday. FAFSA will then send your information to the selective service to get that done. Next slide, this begins asking questions about the high school completion status, what degree will the student be pursuing in the 1920 academic year, and also what grade level the student will be in the 1920 academic year. After they click next, the next set of questions are about work study. Guys, y'all know my response about federal work study. Yes, the answer is always yes. Do you want to be considered for federal work study? Yes, you do. The student can always turn it down. As a reminder, federal work study is where a student can work on a college campus and get paid out of a specific pot of money that does not impact their FAFSA's expected family contribution. So again, yes is always the answer for the federal work study question, in my opinion. All right. Also asked the questions about the high school completed by parent 1, parent 2. Guys, FYI, to my knowledge, in our state, these questions don't necessarily mean anything to our students, meaning for scholarship purposes, but the reason these questions are on the FAFSA are because in some states do award first-generation college scholarships based on these responses, so that's why these questions are answered. So, and specifically, it is about the parent, the biological parents. This is one section of the FAFSA where this is about the biological parents, no matter if those biological parents are divorced. And as always, obviously, if a student does not know his biological parent, then he can always, or she can always select none or unknown as their school completion status. The next screen is for the student to enter their high school information. So after that, next, then we get into where the student begins searching for the colleges they want their FAFSA to go to. They can add up to 10 colleges. Not that they have to, but they can. So the common question, Jason, I'm looking at 16 colleges. How do I get it to all 16? Well, you'd have to submit your FAFSA once with 10. And then once it processes, you then would have to return, make a correction, delete those 10 schools, and then add 6 schools resubmit. That way then that FAFSA not only goes to those initial 10 that you initially submitted to, then upon the correction and the second submission, that FAFSA would then go to the 6 that you added at that point in time. Next screen is where students will select their housing information at each college. And then the final 5 screens here are all about those dependency questions. Questions like, you know, do you have any children? Are you in a legal guardianship? Are you homeless? So forth and so on. And notice these questions are in chunks now this year. So all these 5 screens, all of them are in chunks. Assuming the student answers no to all the questions, they then arrive at that final slide that says, hey, based on this, you are dependent. Are you able to provide parental information? Assuming you are, you then click next to begin providing parental information. Now we're into the parent section. Notice there's no color change here. The only change here is that top blue ribbon now says parent information. So the first question, parent, what is your parent's marital status? And folks, and this is something Mary Nell and I have talked about, and this is something I'm going to go back and ask perhaps FAFSA to consider doing. I think especially for our divorced parents, this question can be the most confusing of the FAFSA. So this question is actually asking, well, your biological parents, what's their marital status, right? Well, so let's say we're divorced, but here's the thing. As y'all know, right, if I live with my mom and my mom's remarried, FAFSA needs that step-parents information. So in that example, mom, stepdad in this case, should indicate married or remarried, and then they would indicate the month and year that, quote, mom became remarried to stepdad, and then FAFSA would then ask for mom's information and stepdad's information, or flip the or you can flip that example, obviously, to dad and stepmom. It's confusing because I will say this. There were 2 instances yesterday. I did helped family with the FAFSA, but it was one of those things. We were in that setting where I'm helping like 15 families at a time. So I can't look at everything that one particular family is doing. And at the very end, the student submitted the FAFSA, quote unquote, with mom's information. But as mom and I got to talking, and she mentioned about being remarried, I was like, did you put stepdad's information on the FAFSA? And she goes, it didn't ask me. Well, again, it's because of the way that question is unfortunately worded that we need to teach our, and this is for myself and my team, I think we need to teach our parents and students maybe in our presentations better that, again, if you are remarried, FAFSA is going to require step-parents information.
Okay, I have a question. In the AFCA magazine, it stated that listing a state school first on the FAFSA makes a difference. A state school should always be listed first to see state-eligible grant money. If students do not, they may miss out on an important state aid opportunity. Is this true?
All right, so great question. And, you know, much like when we present, right, this AFCA magazine or whatever the acronym was, guys, you got to understand, that's being written for a general audience, and I'm assuming consumers all across the United States, right? Here's 2 things you need to know about college codes now. Even though I list, let's say, 10 college codes on the FAFSA, 2 years ago, FAFSA changed where now these colleges no longer see the other 9 schools that you listed. So that order of preference is now a moot point. So in other words, if I put on my FAFSA Vandy, UT, WKU, Nashville State, right, Vandy's not going to see those other 3 schools I just named, WKU's not going to see those other 3 schools I named, Nashville State, so forth and so on. In terms of state aid purposes, folks, I really just need that student to list a Tennessee institution, because remember how we do it at TSAC, all right? The way we do it at TSAC is now listen to me carefully, the first Tennessee school that appears on that list, that's what we use for state aid purposes. So example, Ole Miss, I list Ole Miss, Western Kentucky, University of Georgia, University of Alabama, and now it's Belmont. When I get that student's FAFSA at TSAC, that student state aid, we're going to hone in on Belmont because that was the first school that that student, quote unquote, listed. Back to the list. I, at TSAC, am still able to see the order that the student listed their schools in, but again, the colleges do not. So again, all due respect to AFCA, but understanding that they're saying that very generally because different states may be different. In Tennessee, two things. I just need that student to put a Tennessee school on that FAFSA. In terms of where it is, does not matter. Just understand whichever one's listed first, that's where that student's aid will be locked into until the student, say, changes it through the TSAC student portal. And then the second thing, as I just said, again, that order no longer matters. Why? Because those schools no longer see the other schools listed on the FAFSA.
Okay, so follow-up question. What if it is a private Tennessee university? Do they need to be listed do they need to have that school listed as the first school to receive the aid at that school?
So in terms of state aid purposes, back in the day, you would have heard me say yes. Guys, I'm more into list of schools in the order of most likely that you're going to attend, right? Especially as it relates to state aid purposes. So if UT Chattanooga is my leader in the clubhouse, UT Chattanooga should be my first Tennessee college listed on the FAFSA. Again, even if it's third or fourth and there's some out-of-state schools listed first. Let me say this if you're concerned about something, and just in case I'm not speaking out both sides of my mouth. The only program where this might be, this question might be relevant for is TSAA, the Tennessee Student Assistance Award. As you guys know with TSAA, that is a program where it's state appropriated. We're not able to fund all students. That's why the priority FAFSA deadline for it's February 1. Back in the day, we definitely used to, back in the day, encourage students to, if they're considering, say, Lipscomb, a private college, that school should be listed first because obviously a Lipscomb is going to receive $4,000 versus a four-year public, Austin Peay, for example, that would receive $2,000 versus, say, a Dyersburg State Community College that would receive $1,300. So in that case, if you were to list Lipscomb first, right, from a money perspective, from our perspective, it's always easier for us to adjust your funding down as opposed to up. And back in the day, we used to have funding issues like that. Now, last couple of years, we've been better, but we still only have X amount of dollars. Now, my point is, I can stand here and say, as long as you submit your FAFSA by February 1, as of today, right, if you submit that 1920 FAFSA by February 1 and the student has a 0 to 21 degree of C, that student will be TSAA eligible. But if you're someone that might be a little bit concerned, and if you would like to lean one way versus the other, I would be okay in this example for you saying listing Union or CBU or Rhodes or Carson-Newman or Tusculum before another public college, just for TSAA purposes, just in case something happens with funding this year. I'm not saying there is, right? But if you're someone that might be, you know, if you want to lean one way or the other safely, you can lean that way by listing that private school first if you want to, just in case there's an issue with funding.
Okay. And then she had one more follow-up question. If a student changes their mind over the summer and they change the school that's listed in their TSAC portal, do they also need to change it on the FAFSA?
So the only reason they would need to touch their FAFSA is if that school was not on their FAFSA. So for example, let's say I ended up choosing to go to Pellissippi State. However, Pellissippi State never was on my 1920 FAFSA. Then in that example, you are correct. A, you've got to go to the portal, update it on the portal, but then secondly, you would need to return to your 1920 FAFSA and then also, add Pellissippi State again if it was not on the FAFSA. Now, if it was on the FAFSA, you're good to go. Whether it was 10th on the FAFSA, 6th on the FAFSA, 3rd on the FAFSA, whatever, you don't have to change that order of the FAFSA. You would then, in that case, just need to do the TSAC student portal change. Great questions.
Great. Good.
So back to parent information. First couple of screens you see here, parent 1's information, name, social date of birth, parent 2, name, social date of birth, parent's email address, again, residency question, just like the student. So there's 4 screens for the parent. And then we get into, right there, then we start getting into household size. For some reason yesterday, a lot of parents and students were stumped by this household size screen. Guys, so this year, it's kind of adding as you go type thing. Like if you indicate you have parent 1 and parent 2, it's going to lock in 2 for the number of parents. It's going to lock in the student, 1 student, so that means we're at least starting at a household size of 3. The next question asks, how many brothers and sisters or other children do your parent have? Or does your parent, yeah, does your parent have? That is correct grammar, right? So in this case, right, if I have 2 brothers and sisters, I will then enter the number 2. That will then increase my household size to 5, and so forth and so on. And then it asks how many in that household will be in college. So assuming, let's say there's just 1 in college, then you just put 1 and you move on. But again, I saw a lot of parents and students yesterday, Marinelle, that were perplexed by this screen. Honestly, I think they're just not reading. But again, I helped a lot of folks with that. Next 3 screens now begin talking about the parent's tax information. Did you file in 2017? Answer accordingly. You know, ideally, if they did file by indicating already completed, they'll enter their username and password, where they'll then be able to hopefully use the data retrieval tool. And once they enter their username and password, they'll have the box that says, do you want to proceed to the IRS site? Yes, you do. Here are screenshots of that IRS site where, again, the information, this is why I want their tax return. I want to see how their information, specifically their name and their address, was used on the actual tax return, because that's what will need to be entered on the IRS site. Hopefully they'll be able to find or IRS will be able to locate their 2017 tax information. Again, folks, forgive me, these are the only slides that were available through FSA as of this moment. Understand they're going to see their 2017 tax information if they're doing their 1920 FAFSA. Point here is, if you see where it's asking about their 2016 tax information, that should tip you off that they're doing the wrong FAFSA year. Ideally, you'll transfer that. When you go back, you'll then see the transferred information. All right. Here is where more screens with transferred information, 5 additional screens about the parent's income and assets. Once we get past this part, now this is where we go back to the student information for most students. All right. There are some exceptions where some student information may be skipped based on parent's income. Specifically, if it's $26,000 or less, then that student's information may be skipped, right? So for students, though, that are unable to skip, again, parents need to be cognizant. If they're the ones doing the FAFSA, this is asking about the student's income information, and again, specifically their 2017 tax information if filed. Once you get past those 4 screens, or I should say 5 or 6 or 7 screens, because there's more income asset stuff here, but the same like it is for the parents as well. Finally, you get to the screen with ask, are you a preparer? I like what they did here, Marinelle. This year, beside the question, are you a preparer, they have in parentheses, this is rare. Guys, it is rare, right? A preparer is someone who charges the family to do a FAFSA. So, you know, none of us at our schools are charging these kids to do FAFSA, right? So again, the answer is no. They click next. And now you see the new top right-hand corner. This is the new signature page where one at a time the student will click that blue box that says student signature. They'll agree to the term statement. They'll then click the blue box to sign the FAFSA. The parent will then repeat that process. Once both have signed, or if the student has signed, but let's say the parent's without a social, once that signature page has been printed, then the student can submit the FAFSA, and this is where they'll find their signature page, all right? or I should say this is where they'll see the confirmation screen, which this is now the blown up version of the confirmation screen where you now see the expected family contribution. Above that, guys, note top right-hand box, if you're working with a family that, let's say, has twins or just brothers and sisters, this is where if you do one student's FAFSA, they're able to click that, does your brother or sister need to complete the FAFSA too? If they're able to click that, a new window should open where then that second student can log in. The beauty of this is all the parental information from that first FAFSA that's been uploaded will then transfer over to that student's FAFSA. I was able to do this 3 times yesterday. I had no problems doing it. Guys, as always, depending on your school's computers and system, pop-up locks, etc., right? This works. It worked 3 times for me yesterday, but sometimes you do run into issues with pop-up blockers or just the schools that I might be at, your system, which again, that's no slight at your system. Your system is what it is, right, in terms of security-wise. But that is an option specifically for our students or parents that have multiple students where they can click that box and all their information transferred to a new FAFSA. So, a couple just reminders as we kind of wrap up here. Common FAFSA issues, again, socials, names, again, all that's got to match what's on the Social Security card, period. Date of birth issues, you know, I see this a lot with our immigrant population, guys. So just FYI, date of birth abroad, I think, are reverse as they are here. So, for example, here, I say my date of birth is, you know, January the 12th, 2000, right? 01/12/2000. But abroad, that might read 12/01/2000. So guys, understand, that's something our immigrant population needs to be aware of, that when they enter, whether it's for FSA ID or for FAFSA, that order in the United States is month, day, year, not day, month, year like it is abroad. Missing signatures is always an issue, sometimes just because of signature issues, right? Other issues, grade level, folks, I saw these issues all day yesterday. I'm not just making it up. I did. Students that indicate their grade year is first year graduate professional. God bless them. Right? They are a high school graduate as of 1920, but obviously that means that they're pursuing a master's or doctorate. So again, they need to be indicating never attended first year in terms of their grade level. Degree, same thing. Some of our students are indicating graduate professional. They're skipping a few steps. They should be first bachelor's, associate's, certificate, diploma. Income and tax information, or excuse me, income and that tax paid question being manually reported the same. Folks, FAFSA says where you need to be looking on your tax information if you are unable to use data retrieval. The mistake here sometimes is I have parents that are reporting I made $60,000 and then their income tax is also $60,000. Those numbers should never match, right? There's a specific line items on the FAFSA where that parent will look, or the student will look to enter their income tax, again, if they're unable to use data retrieval. And then finally, parent-student report the same information. That goes to the, I, parent, have just completed my income section, and they don't pay attention, and then we get to the student information screen, they then begin manually entering parent income information for the student. I had 2 of those yesterday where I had students making, you know, one case $50,000, another case $90,000. Thankfully, I saw it on the summary screen, and then we were able to correct it. Because, like, folks, that student, I know you didn't make $90,000, and if you did, God bless you, right? All right. Third time I've said this, income from work. For our parents who are married and file jointly, the 2 things that are unable to transfer is that income earned from work. This is why I need those W-2s, so that we can report how much did Jason make versus how much did Mary make, right? Parent 1 versus parent 2. We have to have the W-2s in order to actually report that. You typically are not going to be able to ascertain that from the tax return because everything's joint, right? So that's why we need that information. If you're wondering, why is this important for FAFSA? Folks, because of the EFC formula. The EFC formula takes into account the age of the oldest parent and his or her income. So it does matter as that EFC is being calculated. There's an income allowance protection that is, or income protection allowance, however you want to say it, that's placed upon the oldest parent's income that obviously potentially helps with that student's EFC, right, meaning lower it. So that's why it's important that we actually report how much parent 1 makes versus parent 2 by looking at the W-2s. Here's a slide for those of you. We're going to send out this PowerPoint. This is always a helpful slide, especially for our parents that do have to report their assets. What FAFSA means in terms of assets, investments versus what they do not, right? So quick screenshot that you can kind of review later. And then finally, as always, I always encourage my students and parents to review the student aid report. Once that FAFSA is processed, typically, once the FAFSA is submitted, it takes 72 hours to process. Your exception, for our parents who have to do the signature pages, once that's signed and mailed, that FAFSA may take 2 or 3 or 4 weeks to process. Ultimately, that student will get credit for the day he or she submitted the FAFSA. But it's going to take longer for that FAFSA process because that signature page has to be mailed and processed by federal student aid. But once that student aid report's available, I always encourage the student to review it. If they see an asterisk by that EFC, that means the student has been selected for FAFSA verification. This is a screenshot of last year's student aid report because I don't have a new one again. But again, this is an example. I see that EFC 1702 has an asterisk beside it. In the third or second paragraph, however you want to read that below, that FAFSA student aid report then also states your FAFSA has been selected for a review process called verification. So we need our students aware of this earlier than later, right, so that they can then begin satisfying this process for the college that they attend, all right? As always, folks, here's my team, my contact information, etc. So obviously if you have questions, you guys know this. Everyone on the call, you can always email or call or text me. That is my cell phone number on there, but obviously that is your respective outreach specialist depending on what county you are in. Mary Nell, it's 11:01.
I know.
I did this in 59 minutes because we started at 10:02.
So impressed. We do have a couple of questions if you have time to take them. So if parent 1 is the older parent and is retired and drawing Social Security disability and retirement, and parent 2 is still working, how should this be reported on the W-2 since the older parent is considered the older is parent 1?
Yeah, so in this case, and guys, say this, regardless of who's parent 1 and parent 2, that's dictated by how the student or parent enters that information, right? So just understand, I mean, it's okay if parent 2 is the oldest parent because, again, that's just how it's on. But that said, to your question, in this case, the question that we just saw a few slides ago was specifically, what was the income earned from work? If parent 2 is retired/disabled and is not working, then parent 2's income earned from work is 0. Parent 1, in this case, I would be able to more than likely look at that tax return even though it's joint. If only, you know, the other parent's working, then that's where we can look at lines 7 plus 12 plus 18 because we only know that the income reported on those lines would be based upon the other parent. Because again, that older parent that's on disability or Social Security, that's typically not going to be taxed. The only reason it would be taxed is if that particular parent's income was above a certain threshold. Guys, as a reminder, Social Security, SSDI, generally is never reported anywhere on the FAFSA, even under untaxed information. Good question.
Okay, just as a reminder, we're going to continue to field these, but as you have them, you can type them in the chat or the Q&A feature. I can view both of those. So the latest one is, can you explain what the definition of foster care is for when the student is asked quote, any time since you turned age 13 were you in foster care? And what if the student is now back with their parent or an aunt who has temporary legal custody?
Wow, great question. And yeah, Connie, great question. So my definition of foster care, and some people can push back on this, my definition of foster care is that that student was in DCS, Department of Children's Services custody. That's my definition. So, quote unquote, they were in state custody. So, but Connie, here's the thing, and this goes to the second part of your question. That question on the FAFSA is specifically at any time at 13 or thereafter, if that student was in state custody / DCS custody, Connie, that student should be independent. That student should be able to answer yes on the FAFSA to that question, and that student should be independent, meaning at this point in time, that student should not need to be able to report mom's information, even if he was back, say, with mom, or even the aunt who has legal custody. Now, this is where, Marielle, sometimes I think we've done this presentation. Guys, as a reminder, an aunt, an uncle, a grandparent will never be a parent on a student's FAFSA unless they have legally adopted that student, right? So, Connie, again, my definition of foster care is, again, being in state custody, DCS custody. Obviously, if we need to talk further, let's talk offline and maybe talk further, maybe specifically about this issue. But again, if he or she was ever in foster care or DCS custody at any time after the 13th birthday, that student should be independent on the FAFSA by answering yes to that specific question.
Okay, well, I do not see any other questions, and I'm very proud, an hour and 1 minute. Very impressive. So thank you all so much for joining us today. Like we said before, this recording will be available on tnfafsafrenzy.gov, and we will also share the slides out as well. So thank you so much, everybody.